6 months ago, I took delivery of this, a 2024 Ioniq 6 SE rear-wheel drive. And in today's video, I'm gonna give you guys a 6-month update on what it's like to live with this car. So if you guys wanna find out what I like, what I dislike after 6 months, then stay tuned. As you can tell by the beautiful foliage around me, fall is in full swing. We're getting to be about peak foliage here in the next week or two, and it's just absolutely beautiful. But this also means that it has been 6 months since my 2-year lease on this car started. You might recall, lease deals in the spring were incredible across the line for Ioniq 5, Ioniq 6, EV6. They've all seemed to have progressively gotten a little worse over the year. I'm paying a little over $200 per month to lease the Ioniq 6, which is just absurd. At the time, this was the cheapest lease available in the United States, and that was with 0 down as well. So when I saw those lease deals, I said, you know what, I'm the Ioniq guy. For a couple $100 a month, I might as well add the Ioniq 6 to the lineup for a couple years. So in about 18 months, we'll be trading this in and looking to get something else. So let me know down in the comment section what you would want to see added to the channel. I would really like to add the Kia EV3 at the time when this ends, because that is going to be coming out around that time, but we will see. Now, I will say, so far, things have been great with the Ioniq 6. The looks have really grown on me. I love this ultimate red color. I used to really think that if I were gonna get one, transmission blue would have been my top choice, but you might have seen recently that I did do a cross-country race with a bunch of other EVs and Kyle Connor from out of spec from Seattle to Boston. But that car that I drove across country was transmission blue, and honestly, it's kind of boring. I really like the ultimate red. It really sticks out. It's really just a fun looking color, especially considering the Ioniq 5 comes in some pretty dull colors. There's been no mechanical issues, no electrical issues. This thing charges at full 11 kilowatts, no problems whatsoever. My efficiency is incredible with this car. Since I took delivery, my efficiency has been 4.3 miles per kilowatt hour, which blows away my Ioniq 5. Last time I looked, I think that was about 3.4. So this is almost an entire mile further per kilowatt hour than the Ioniq 5. Granted, that has all-wheel drive. This is rear-wheel drive. If this were an all-wheel drive version, I would definitely expect that number to be a little more close to the Ioniq 5. But with this lease, I really wanted to show you guys what it's like to live with a base model. My Ioniq 5 is an SEL, so it's got some more bells and whistles. I mean, this is pretty bare bones. At this point in time, I would say this is the fewest number of options I would accept on a new car. You don't get even a auto-dimming rear view mirror, which is pretty annoying at this price point. I mean, this is still a $40,000+ car. But when you factor in what I'm paying for a lease, I can deal with it. So we've only put 2,000 miles on it in the last 6 months, so we will be lucky if we do 4,000 miles in the first year of this lease. I'm going to try and force myself to drive it more. We are now living in Boston. It's tough to drive in that area, especially during rush hour. If any of you live in the area, you know how horrible traffic is there, but I still think I have a pretty good understanding of everything that I like and dislike about the Ioniq 6. I love that even here on the base model, you get really nice lighting. The lighting stays the same across SE, SCL, and limited trims here in the US. So you also get the really nice full LED light bar across the back. It's not really easy to see right now because it's bright daylight, but you can kind of see it flickering because of the camera's shutter speed. With those headlights though, I really do wish that they did swivel. Sometimes, especially out here in the woods, driving at night, you're going around a corner, you would just feel a little bit more reassurance if you did have swiveling headlights and could illuminate some of the corners that you're going around. Something I learned on that cross-country trip is that the hood, as well as the trunk on the Ioniq 6, are actually aluminum. This section here is aluminum. And the reason I know that is I had an Ioniq Guy magnet with a QR code to my website made up for that trip. And the only place on the back here that I could find a suitable location to place it was right here. This is steel, this is aluminum. Didn't realize that until this trip. One of the more interesting things about the Ioniq 6 is the fact that it kind of sits like a small crossover. You can see that when I get in and out, I'm really not that low to the ground. I'm not tucked up like this. I did sit in the Porsche Taycan on this trip, and for somebody of my height, it is really challenging to get in and out of that car. I really like driving this car. It doesn't have a ton of power, it's 220 horsepower, but it's got enough torque that I'm never really thinking, oh my God, I can't get this car to get out of its own way. The steering is pretty numb. This car is not meant to be a sports car. It's not meant to give you a ton of feedback through the steering wheel. It's meant to be a commuter car. It's meant to be a family car. That's why eventually Hyundai is going to release an Ioniq 6N, just like the Ioniq 5N. It's going to be a high-performance sports car. But this car definitely handles better than my Ioniq 5. It's lower to the ground, it's a little less tall, so it's got more mass lower down, so it takes turns pretty good. The suspension here is a little bit tighter than the Ioniq 5. So I do like that. I think this thing just handles a lot better than the Ioniq 5. The Ioniq 5 likes to really undulate and float a little too much, where this is a little bit tighter. It really kind of just hits a bump, recovers really quickly. And I know for 2025, the Ioniq 5 is getting a revised suspension as well, so I will hold judgment for what the future of the Ioniq 5 looks like until I get to drive the 2025. Highway Drive Assist is awesome in the Ioniq 6. This has 1.5, not Highway Drive Assist 2, and it's rock solid. On the highway driving down to Connecticut today, there were times where I would go 5 minutes without touching the steering wheel before it gave me a warning to take control over again. So that entire time, it was just staying centered in the lane, following the car in front of it. It worked perfectly. I was stuck in some stop and go traffic today. It worked perfectly. On that 3,000-mile cross-country trip, everybody in the car came to the conclusion that Highway Drive Assist kicks ass. So I was really happy to hear that with those people who were new to Hyundai's cars. I trust it, but there's other people who complain about the fact that it will disengage auto lane centering without really warning you audibly. So that is a little worrisome right there that it does that, but I don't have an issue with it. I find it disengages so infrequently that it's just not something that I ever really think about. One thing I'm really bummed about is that the Comma 3X that I use in my Ioniq 5, which allows for hands-off highway driving, and it doesn't work here on the base model Ioniq 6. I don't know if that's just because Comma doesn't want to support it, but it is only available on the SEL and the limited trim. So had I known that, I probably would have sprung for an SEL rear-wheel drive and then gotten the Aero wheels just for that sheer fact, because I love the Comma 3X and Open Pilot so much. Well, I actually use Sunny Pilot, which is a different fork of it, but regardless, it's still a fantastic system, and having it here in the Ioniq 6 would have just made it an even better car. I'm really hoping sometime in the next year and a half, Comma will begin supporting this car with their device. But it is a fantastic around town commuter car. But at the end of the day, I do really like driving the Ioniq 6. Now I will say, living in a city now, this car is pretty long, so parallel parking can be a little bit more challenging to find spots that you will fit in. Ioniq 5 is a little bit shorter. It has shorter front and rear overhangs, so it is easier to park. And I've still had pretty decent luck parking this thing. I will say the turning radius is abysmal in the city, doing K-turns and stuff. I really wish it had better turning radius. Having driven the rear-wheel drive Volkswagen ID4, which basically turns on a dime, this thing is just abysmal. I hope in future iterations they can work on that turning radius, even if it's just in the rear-wheel drive version. If they can't do it on the all-wheel drive, then so be it. The paint's holding up really well. The car is garage kept, so I wouldn't really expect to see too much damage. Obviously, that's the original door ding I got on day one. Now, what I really like about the Ioniq 6 is it makes driving efficiently kind of fun and kind of like a game. I basically leave this thing in eco mode all the time, unless I know I'm about to have to do something where I'm gonna have to accelerate pretty quick, and I'll throw it into sport mode. But I leave it in eco mode. It keeps that accelerator pedal nice and dulled, so I'm not tempted to accelerate too quickly, and that helps boost your efficiency. And that's clearly evident by the fact that I'm averaging 4.3 miles per kilowatt hour over the last 2,000 miles. You guys know that I really like these door handles. They're the same ones that are on my Ioniq 5. But they're taken up a level here because they do have illumination on the back sides. So if you walk up to the car in the dark, you can actually see where the door handles are. The Ioniq 5, at least my SEL, does not have those. Some of you might not know it, but the shark fin antenna on the Ioniq 6 is actually a clear black plastic, so you can kind of see all of the electronic bits inside of there. It's kind of cool. Now I will say that this being a rear-wheel drive car, there have been instances in the rain where the roads are wet and I can feel the back end slipping out a little bit. I definitely yearn for a little bit more traction in those instances. The trunk in the Ioniq 6 has been plenty for us. We've been swapping this in the Ioniq 5 out and bringing one up to Boston and then leaving one here with my mother to drive. And yeah, no issues. We load this up with all of our trash now that we have to go to a dumpster for trash and recycling. Really no issues. Like for 2 people, plenty of space. We haven't really taken it on a journey yet, but on that Seattle to Boston race that I did with Out of Spec, we did have our trunk fully loaded with snacks and bags and stuff, and it was enough for 3 people. And we definitely had space for stuff for a 4th person. We do store my hitch mount bike rack with our bikes attached to it in the front of our parking spot in the garage. And you can see I had a little mishap here where I misjudged how far I was pulling in, and I hit the hitch on the bike rack and damaged this section here. A little touch-up paint will make it a little less evident, but I'm just really happy it didn't hit in this center section here because that's where the radar is, and that might have totally destroyed it. Like with other Hyundai Kia products, the parking sensors on this thing are extremely annoying. They're extremely sensitive to other vehicles. Specifically, I've noticed Ford vehicles. I don't know if there's some frequency interruption going on between those parking sensors and Hyundai's, but I find myself turning off the parking sensors in this car sometimes multiple times per drive. I really wish they would fix this and figure it out because it is extremely annoying. Something else I really miss from my Ioniq 5 is having the auto folding side mirrors. Being in a parking garage and parking on the street a lot, it would just make life a little bit easier. So I really appreciate the big back seat, but with that big back seat and the long wheelbase of this car, you do have very long rear doors, and in a parking garage where you only got about a foot between you and your neighbor, it can be really difficult to get into the back seat when you're trying to put stuff back there. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse in that regard. I already mentioned this, no issues whatsoever with level 2 charging on this car. I honestly don't think I have DC fast charged this car. You'll notice that I did tint the windows, front, rear, the little cornering window back here, as well as the rear windshield. I hate having super crystal clear glass on cars. I want a little privacy when I'm in my car. So I did get these tinted to the lowest legal level in Massachusetts so that I wouldn't get hassled by the RMV. Sadly, the level 2 charging at our apartment complex is only about 6 kilowatts. It takes absolutely eons to charge this thing up from 0 to 100. Really wish they could have done at least 32, 40 amps would have been nice. It really does take a very long time to fully charge. Here on the inside of the Ioniq 6, I really have grown to love being in this car. I've gotten used to having the window switches here. Yes, it did take a little bit of time, but I'm finally there. It has also taken a little bit of time to get used to having the steering wheel control switches swapped versus the Ioniq 5. Climate control has worked great. I still really hate the fact that the upper door panels here are hard plastic. Even in the limited trim, this is all hard plastic. I really don't like that because there's a lot of times when I'm driving where I do hold the steering wheel like this and rest my elbow up here, and it's just not comfortable. But foot room is fantastic. Plenty of knee room on the left here with this concave sort of speaker grill. And then over here on the right side, my knee just rests on this piece of plastic here. It is soft-ish, but it's not super soft, so it can be a little irritating after a while. You'll notice here on the armrest, I am covering it with Best EV Mods Ioniq 6 armrest cover. This is a huge improvement over the relatively hard rubber material here on the armrest. This is definitely a little bit more foamy. It definitely helps to keep your elbow a little bit more comfortable. I'll have a link in the description if you're interested in purchasing one. You can see here in the center console, I have my cup holder expander, as well as a couple eyeglass holders for my regular glasses that I wear at night, and sunglasses for when I drive during the day. Really helpful since there's no overhead storage for sunglasses, so you can keep them right here on the center console. I do really like these seats. They are fabric, but I don't mind that, to be perfectly honest. I kind of am digging the sedan seating position where your legs are a little more kicked out. Just feels a little bit more laid back, a little bit more comfortable versus the Ioniq 5. And the steering wheel comes out decently far. I think ideally I would want it to come out maybe an inch further. I can always move the seat forward about an inch, and that kind of does it for me. But if I want my legs to be as comfortable as I possibly can get them, then I need to be a little bit further back. But really no complaints in terms of comfort while driving. That was mostly the consensus with the two other drivers, Mike and Lacey, that were with me in the car on that cross-country drive. I don't use the glove box in the car. It's too big. Things just rattle around, so I don't keep anything in there. Still no over-the-air software updates for this car. I'm not talking navigation, infotainment. I'm talking about for the drivetrain, the powertrain, whatever. This car was supposed to come with that from the factory when it was launched in the United States, but I have heard that because of the 12-volt issues with the car, the battery does have to get put onto a battery tender to install those updates at the dealership, which is why we haven't seen any over-the-air updates at home. And even with the latest navigation update, I did not get that over the air. It was weeks later after the Ioniq 5s came out, and it still didn't come out here, so I manually updated it. So annoying that we have to still be doing that in 2024. They did add some nice new features to route planning. They made it a little better to use, but it is still very poor compared to some of its competitors. On this cross-country drive, I did spend a little bit of time in the Tesla Model 3, the new Highland version, and I can safely say I understand why people like Tesla's system. Super quick, not that this is slow, super quick, and it plans a route like that from coast to coast, plans every charging stop. Granted, Tesla has all this proprietary data about their charging network to pull from, whereas with Hyundai, they're basically relying on Electrify America, EVgo, ChargePoint, all those networks to provide information to their system, so it's not as easy. But man, we didn't even use the system on that cross-country drive because it was so bad. We used PlugShare, we used the Electrify America app, we planned all of our charging stops ourselves. If we followed the navigation system here, we would have lost miserably to our competition pulling into Boston. Sound levels in this car are fantastic. All the double glazed glass in this car really contributes to a nice hushed interior. This car's quieter than the Ioniq 5. On that road trip, it was just so nice and pleasant to be in such a quiet interior. I've been in cars on road trips that are just so loud. I remember me and my friends took her Honda CR-V. It was like a 2012 to Pittsburgh from Hartford. And oh my God, the wind noise in that car drove me insane. This was even before I was driving an EV. I had a Mazda CX-5 at the time. But man, Honda did not pay any attention to road or wind noise in that CR-V. It was the worst sounding interior of any car I've ever been in. I've never been in such a loud interior. And this is just so tomb-like quiet. I love it. What I'm not crazy about is the sound system, just like with my Ioniq 5. Bass 6-speaker system just sounds relatively mediocre, especially for backseat passengers. On that road trip, I was in the back a lot. We had music playing in the front, and I could almost barely hear it in the back. They could have played with the settings to push some more of the sound to the back, but with it centered, it sounded really too quiet in the back seat. The screens in here have looked good. My complaint though is the silver painted plastic that surrounds both screens. It reflects onto the windshield and it's really annoying. Somebody emailed me a few months ago and said they were going to 3D print some sort of applique you could put around there. I haven't heard from them since, but that would be kind of nice. I would definitely buy one because that silver really does drive me crazy. I do love the fact that I can now open my charge port flap from the inside of the car. My 2022 Ioniq 5 does not have that. 2025 Ioniq 5 does, however, have that. My only other real major complaint about this interior is that on the base model here, you only get a black interior and everything is black, sans this silver bit on the dashboard. And like the door pulls and stuff. The headliner is black. It makes it feel really a little claustrophobic in here. I did add an LED light to the 12-volt port down here in the lower portion of the center console. That does help illuminate the front footwells a little bit, but even still, just a very dark interior. There's no ambient lighting here in the base model. The SEL and the limited trim do get the ambient lighting on the interior, and it's very well done. It's in a lot of nice spots. I do really miss having that here versus when I had the limited trim for a review a couple years ago. But I don't want to make this video too long. Let's hop in the back seat and I'll tell you about that. So here in the back of the Ioniq 6, you can see tons of knee room. On this road trip that we took the car on, I was mostly hanging out on the passenger side of the back seat because whoever was in the front passenger seat could move the seat forward a little bit more. And I could just like completely spread out. I was like this a lot of the time. The two people that were with me were a little bit shorter, so they actually laid down on the back seat at some points. I'm a little too tall to do that. But I was able to get pretty comfortable back here that I was able to get a couple hours of sleep. I don't sleep well in moving objects, so planes, cars, trains, I just can't sleep very well. I did have one of those eye masks and I put in noise canceling headphones and that did help. But even still, driving across the country on 2 hours of sleep was pretty exhausting. But I was comfortable most of the time. I had a little pocket here to put my smartphone and I stored my earbud case here and some other things. We had snacks galore in the back seat here. And overall, I was perfectly comfortable back here. So I'm going to say this back seat is road trip approved. Headroom was never really an issue because I was kind of leaning back most of the time, but it is a little tight. You can see here my head is just about touching. My bald head is just scraping the headliner. Having the armrest down definitely made a difference too. And an issue we actually ran into on the road trip was the fact that unlike the Ioniq 5, there are no levers on the sides of the seats here to fold down the back seats. So we had a ton of snacks in the trunk. We had a cooler. So when we were on the road, we actually wanted to grab some stuff and we couldn't because these seats weren't unlatched from the trunk prior. So we weren't able to get in until our next charging stop, which was a couple hours later. But once we did that, we unlatched them, we folded them forward just a smidge so that they weren't latched so that we could fold it completely flat and then get into the trunk from the back seat. And that was really helpful. If you have regular rear seat passengers that use big 40-ounce water bottles, I also have cup holder expanders for the rear armrest as well. And all of these accessories are available on my website at ioniqguy.com. I will say though that there were some points on the road trip where I was back here and I was a little warm. There's no ventilation on the B pillar here like in the Ioniq 5. It's down lower here on the back of the center console. And I don't know if it's just weaker than the Ioniq 5 system, but I was definitely a little warm in the back seat at times. It was really nice, however, to have some USB-Cs. So I brought one cable on the trip, USB-C to USB-C, because everything I own is USB-C. But yeah, even for me at 6'2", no real deal breakers here in the back seat. So that really does it for this 6-month review. I kind of wanted to keep this on the shorter side versus some of my Ioniq 5 6-month and 18-month reviews. It's been problem-free. If you want good, cheap, reliable transportation, I really don't think you can go wrong with the Ioniq 6. Super efficient. It comes with 2 years of unlimited free Electrify America charging. So you could basically drive this thing without paying a dime for fuel over 2 years. I don't really recommend you do that just because you clog up the public DC fast chargers. But if you wanted to do that, you theoretically could. And because this thing charges so quickly, you're only spending about 20 minutes at that DC fast charger. So it's really not taking up too much of your time. Everything's just been working great. And going back and forth between Boston and Connecticut, I can do that trip almost 2 times on one single battery with this car. That's just really impressive. That's definitely not something I can say about my Ioniq 5. So anyway, guys, if you liked today's video, give it a thumbs up. Check out my store at ioniqguy.com for accessories for your Ioniq 6, the cup holder expanders, the sunglasses holders, as well as my walk-away door lock device, which after the last door on the car is shut, 10 seconds later, all the doors will lock. You don't have to worry about leaving your doors unlocked with the handles protruded, letting anybody know that they might be able to just get their way into it. That device is going to install with wire taps under the front seat. That's a pretty easy installation. It'll take you about a half an hour. And if you have any questions, send me an email at theioniqguy@gmail.com. If you want to see videos like this before anybody else, consider becoming a channel member for as little as $3 per month. You'll get a discount to my store as well as early access to all of my videos. And as always, I will see you guys in the next one. Take care, everybody.